I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to the Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today we're talking to Josh Campbell, creative director of Spill It. So stay with us for a conversation with Josh. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Youth Villages. Josh, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
For people who don't know, what is Spill It briefly, and then we'll go deeper and deeper into it.
Well, Spill It is a monthly storytelling series here in Memphis. We deal in true personal narrative storytelling in front of a live audience. Our typical events are our slam events where we do open mic storytelling with no notes and as true as you can possibly be.
And the stories are, there's a structure to it. You have a couple different ways you do this. And the structure is kind of fascinating because it's both a little bit improvised, but also there is still structure. It's not just freeform.
Well, there's two types of events. So there's the center stage events, which is kind of the original model of Spill It, where we meet with storytellers beforehand and we help them kind of work out their stories. We give them longer in that format to do that. But then the Spill It Slam events have become more popular, where people put their name in a hat, we draw their name, they get 7 minutes to tell a story, and then at the end the audience votes and we have a winner. So that's more of our competition, whereas the center stage is more about information and learning about people.
And kind of, you all have kind of helped curate that story and worked with them.
Yes. With the center stage event, I meet with storytellers beforehand. We workshop the stories, and that way we can give them a little bit longer, and there's a little more space to fill out the story. And
all of it's without notes, both types?
Yes.
And that is part of it. Why?
Well, because I feel like storytelling is a dialogue between the storyteller and the audience. And the less things that you put as a barrier between you and your audience, the better it is. Holding a sheet of paper in front of yourself is, even though it seems small, can be a barrier. But also just the energy of live and no notes is much different than reading it off the page. You know, when I go to storytelling events where they have a little thing set up, the person is sitting and reading from like a binder, the energy there is just so off.
Yeah.
And there's many times where I'm workshopping with people and they have notes, and I just take the notes out of their hand and it's like, just talk to me, tell me your story. It's your story. You should, the thing that we know the most about is ourselves. So we should be able to speak about ourselves without notes and without.
Right.
So it's the energy of it is just way different.
The only thing, or one thing I can liken it to is doing interviews like this. You know, I have some notes and bullet points in front of me, but would rather just have this conversation with you for 25 plus minutes. And the same thing over on Behind the Headlines, even though it's a more formal show, a handful of times over the years, you'll get somebody a lot of people bring notes and have it in front of them, and that's fine. There's a fact or there's a number or there's a thing. But where they try to really, on the show, instead of talking to me and Bill Dries and maybe the other guests and having a conversation about tax policy or, incentives or the school system, they start reading notes. And I'm kind of I can't say don't read off your note. I mean, if somebody wants to do that, they can.
Yeah.
But it's not as effective.
Right.
As if you tell the story of why that tax policy is dumb or smart, or, you know what I mean? People do respond to storytelling, even in that, when they're not telling, the story is tax policy or school system reform or whatever.
Right.
It's interesting.
I mean, obviously we're in the middle of a political season right now.
Sure.
And there's always the debate about the teleprompter. Like, who are the people that are good on at least appearing not to be reading off a teleprompter? Who are the people who just don't use teleprompters and all of that? And you can feel that energy when someone's really talking to you and not reading to you. And I'm sure on your show, when people fall back on their talking points and it becomes sort of like they're just ticking off that list instead of really talking, becomes, you can feel that.
Right. It becomes, absolutely. And it becomes less, and I'm not saying it's not genuine, but it feels less genuine.
Yeah.
And it comes across less genuine. And it comes across as less authentic.
Yes.
And I always think it's interesting. I mean, again, there's certain things, there are different types of news things, but what you just said of taking the notes from someone, it is always more interesting to have someone make the case and say, well, it's about $1 million. not it's 1.2,344,000. You know what I mean? Like going through and getting really bogged down in the details, make the case for the thing you want to do, which I think is probably what you're doing with people with storytelling is like, tell me your story. Don't worry about getting it right.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Well, that's what I always say, as true as you can make it. I always think that, when people say, what story should I start with? I say, what is your favorite story to tell at a cocktail party? Right? And no one at a cocktail party says, I got one, and then pulls their notes out. Right?
Well, it's probably been done.
Probably.
World's worst cocktail party.
Not a cocktail party you want to go to.
Right.
No. And so, that's what I always try to tell people, like, that's the kind of energy that we're looking for. We're looking for, hey, I got one. Stand up and tell your story. So.
Yeah. I was at a cocktail party once. A friend of mine who is very funny and can tell any story and is just the funniest person. And I told him this insane story earlier in the cocktail party about, and I won't go into it, but I once, to make some money right out of college, I was helping cater at this giant wedding in Connecticut, incredibly fancy wedding. And it all went haywire. And it really wasn't my fault, but I wasn't helping. And there was this whole thing about an ice sculpture that was started. It was meant to be a really giant ice sculpture. I'm using my hands on a podcast, always helpful. But, probably a 4 foot tall, 4 foot wide ice sculpture that it was clearly like the cousin or the brother of the groom kept messing it up through the course of the day prior to the wedding happening. And so finally there was a block about, 6 inches by 6 inches and a tiny dove with not even with its wings extended, but like maybe less the size of a football. That's how much ice this guy had gone through.
Wow.
And that was just melting in the sun. And it's even a longer story than that. It was just insane. And my friend, John, who sometimes listens to the podcast, loved that story. And later in the cocktail party, I'm somewhere and I'm talking to somebody, and over my shoulder I hear my story. And I hear my story being told in the first person. And like John had morphed it over the course of like an hour and a half of that. He was like, no, that's a good story. I'm just going to tell it as if it's my own. I don't care. Who knows? No one knows what I was doing or whether or not I ever helped cater this event.
Right.
I always took that as like a high compliment that I told a good cocktail party story.
Well, there you go.
Someone stole it in real time.
To be quoted by someone else.
Yeah, exactly. Spilt's been going on for how long?
We started in 2014, and it's we're here in the Crosstown Concourse, and the way that we started was across the street at Crosstown Arts.
Yeah.
And Leah Keys was the founder. She works here in Crosstown now at Crosstown High. Her husband Jamie Harmon, the photographer here in Crosstown,
friend of the show,
friend of the show, friend of everyone. They were across the street. Crosstown Arts was across the street, and they wanted to have events that would demonstrate, this was still a plan. They wanted to demonstrate that if you had events in this area of town, that people would come to this area of town. And so they allowed us to use, our first event was in the basement at Crosstown Arts, and they allowed us to use it down there for free. And we continued in those venues for about 2 years. Working in the gallery space, and then eventually Jamie opened the America Photo Studios, and we did it there for a long time. So it really started out as Leah was listening to storytelling as a part of her bed rest after having her daughter, and thought she was in this isolated space and wanted to hear other people's stories. And so when she came out of that, she was like, we need that kind of event here.
Yeah.
So I was a storyteller at the first event. And in the second event, someone came to me and said, could you help me develop my story for the event? And then at that second event, we had someone go for 42 minutes on a story.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And,
if you're not David Sedaris or a handful of people, that's a lot.
Well, he usually doesn't do 42 minutes on one story.
Well, that's a good point. That's true. He might do an hour and a half, but yes, you're going to get 10 stories in there.
Yes. So after that, Leah was like, hey, maybe you should meet with everybody and help them develop their stories. And so that's how when I came on. And then about 5 or 6 years into it, Leah stepped down as running it, and I've been doing it ever since. So.
Natalie Van Gundy, who produces this show, she also produces the events, which we have a couple of events going on through Daily Memphian, and we have speakers on those panels. And we've never, in the now 8 to 10 year history of those events ever had anyone go on too long. It's amazing.
You were lucky.
Yeah, I'm lying. I'm totally lying. And you really do talk to people because, again, it's back to storytelling. Tell the story of, if we're doing a small business seminar, which we recently did, and we had great speakers, because they told the story, their personal story of why, of the struggle. They didn't say, well, we opened this place in 1992 and then this place in May of 93. We opened in the 90s and it was really hard. And they tell a story. And so Natalie does a lot of work with people, keep it to 8 to 10 minutes, focus on these themes. And that really, because even people who know their stuff aren't necessarily, they're nervous public speakers.
Yep.
They're used to maybe talking off PowerPoint bullet points. And again, what we always want, and we had it really successfully at our most recent one, was to people tell their stories. Why small business? And they were funny. And one guy was choking up about the struggles during COVID, and it was kind of amazing. I mean, he was like, God, he was embarrassed and he shouldn't have been. And anyway, so you do need to work with people on that stuff, right? I mean, that's just part of it.
Well, that's part of it, I think, is that it's interesting. People will say, I'm nervous, I don't want to get up there, I don't want to speak. But then once they get up there, they become very comfortable, and then they can go for a while. But working with them is important. But also with the slams, we don't work with anybody beforehand. So that's why that 7-minute mark is there, just because we can.
And you'll hit the buzzer kind of.
Yeah, we have music, we play them off, and all that kind of stuff.
That's much kinder.
Yes, I mean we don't give people the hook, but our audience is. Definitely know there's a time, and when they hear the music going, you can start feeling the audience kind of shuffle in their seats a little bit.
Some light clapping happening. That kind of thing.
Well, that's how I got that 42-minute one to stop. I just started clapping when it got to a period, and that was it. So
again, we're with Josh Campbell from Spill It. You can learn more about. They've got actually an event the day this airs on WYXR, Thursday, September 12th at First Congo, and other events coming up through the fall every month or so, basically, right?
Yeah. So our event on Thursday is, it's called, the theme is a Spill It Slam. The theme is Life is a Festival. We look at Cooper Young as I live in Cooper Young. I feel like it's our Mardi Gras. And so it's a one-day event. Friday, we got the 4-miler. I think we should make it a 3-day event, and everybody come down to First Congo and tell a story Thursday night.
Spill It Memphis has more information about all this and has the schedule of upcoming events and more about the whole organization. And we'll continue talking to Josh from Spill It. Let me do some housekeeping first, though. Remind everyone, I'm Eric Barnes, and this is the Sidebar. It airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. Focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It's not just a radio show, though. It's one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including Bill Drees' Politics podcast, On the Record, the Memphis Grizzlies podcast, hosted by Drew Hill and Chris Harrington, which is ramping up as we get closer to NBA season. The Tigers podcast is back, now with John Martin, who writes for us periodically as a contributor and also a radio host here in town. And some of our other Tigers writers will be on there. There's nothing going on with the Tigers, though, so I don't know what they'll talk about. And we also have Sound Bites, our food podcast, which is hosted by Jennifer Chandler and which also airs here on WYXR every Thursday at 11, right before the Sidebar. I should also, we were talking about Behind the Headlines, which we do with the good folks over at WKNO, the TV show every Friday. We also host the podcast version of that, which has a little bit of extra info every week. That's on the Daily Memphian site or wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify. And the YXR shows are also available at WYXR.org or on the WYXR app. It includes not just our shows, but all the shows, talk and music that appear on WYXR, archives of the past music shows as well. So if there's a DJ you really like, you can get their past shows there. And do become a supporter of WYXR if you can. It is nonprofit, listener-supported radio. You can become a member and get a bunch of benefits. You can do a one-off donation. The support is really welcome. Also, if you're not a paid subscriber to the Daily Memphian, do consider becoming one. Paid subscriptions or pay most of the way of what we do at the Daily Memphian, the largest newsroom in the region. Coming up soon in the coming weeks on the Sidebar, musician Greg Cartwright, who was supposed to be on a month ago, got scheduling mixed up, so we're looking forward to having him on. We recently had Daniel Keel, who is working with Facing History and Ourselves. He was talking about an event they just had but also just talking about social justice, race, the work of Facing History, a bit about his work as a law professor and an author, and actually also did a documentary. Speaking of documentaries, we had Craig Brewer, the filmmaker. He was on a great conversation, not just about Fight Night, the new Muhammad Ali-centered series he has on Peacock, but just what it's like to be Craig and to do work and to have rejection. And it was fascinating. Like, I think he said that even where he is in his career right now, only one of 15 of his pitches ever really gets a chance to be produced, which is pretty remarkable given how successful he is. Behind the headlines this week, we've got Marie Fagans, the superintendent from Memphis Shelby County Schools. In the coming weeks, we've got some folks from City Council, the head of MATA, which has a lot going on right now, as well as Paul Young is coming up in about a month, I think, or 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Paul Young, mayor of Memphis. And recently we had a couple of 3 new school board members. We also had Doug McGowan and the folks from Protect Our Aquifer on the show, and Tina Sullivan, the longtime outgoing head of the Overton Park Conservancy. Last bit of housekeeping is mentioned our small business seminar that happened a week or 2 ago. You can get full video of that at the Daily Memphian site. Just search for Small Business Seminar or go to the Daily Memphian's page or site or whatever the heck it is, channel on YouTube. We had Beverly Robertson, who's been at the National Civil Rights Museum, who's been at the Chamber, who's been in marketing with her husband for decades now. Their son, Ryan Robertson, has taken over that business, so they were talking about that transition of ownership and leadership. It was really great. Scott Tashy from City Silo was on talking about just the craziness of even trying to run a restaurant, let alone a successful one, or a couple of them. And Monique Williams from Biscuits and Jams was on, and she was amazing. Talk about somebody who just they were all really good, but you're talking about like a 7-minute thing. I think she was 8 minutes, no notes, absolutely nailed it. It just told her story and the story of her. And it was a great story. It was awesome. So go back, and if you're interested, you can see that. And then coming up in October 24th at 3:30, our Developing Memphis seminar. That'll focus on various big and small real estate and development projects around town. We know at the very least Chance Carlisle, talking about a lot of the projects that the Carlisles are involved in. He will be there as well as others. You can go to the Eventbrite page for Daily Memphian and register for that. But we are still here with Josh Campbell, creative director of Spill It. Again, spillitmemphis.org has all the upcoming events. You were a teacher.
Yes.
For 20 plus years.
Yeah, so I worked at the Maria Montessori School, at the middle school there in Harbor Town. My wife was the elementary teacher. We recently just bought our own Montessori school.
Okay.
Out on Appling Road, Mid-South Montessori Center. Formerly known as Olivia's Montessori. A lot of people know that sign on Appling Road. So I'm a board member there, so still involved in education. I work at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center and admissions. So the thing I really like about doing Spill It, and especially the workshops that we do, is it kind of still scratches that teacher itch a little bit for me. So, yeah.
Well, having been to some Spill It events and seen this kind of thing in other places, and then I was just doing a little research on you, and I was like, oh, he was a teacher for 22 years. So it's like there's, and the idea, as you were talking about earlier, about working with people, kind of helping them, that's, at its best, that's what a teacher does. They don't just stand up there and tell you what to do. They kind of engage, and certainly, if anybody knows anything about Montessori, it's a much more engaging kind of meet somebody where they are type of teaching than a lecture.
Yes. Montessori is student-centered instead of teacher-centered. And I think storytelling should be that too. Like, you want to be centered on your audience. And people tell me, like, what kind of story should I tell? I don't have like an epic tale or something crazy that really happened to me. And people in the audience don't necessarily want to be wowed by this unique experience that you had. In a story, they want to connect and feel like this is something that can happen to me. They want to be more empathetic than sympathetic when it comes to stories. So by making that, again, the dialogue with the audience, that's where good stories happen. And
you mentioned that you spoke at the first one, right? Or you told the story, I should say, at the first one. Do you do stories at some, many, all of them?
Typically, it depends. But yeah, I've told a lot of stories over the years.
Yeah.
We do expect people to put their name in the bucket.
Yeah.
We would like to have 10 storytellers by the end of the night, but there are quick times where it quickly becomes a one-man show. So
because not as many people are game to get up there.
Yes.
And again, usually, this is the slam type, this style. So it's people, okay.
So typically, if it feels like it's that type of, the last one that we had was at Comeback Coffee in downtown, and they were a great venue. But anytime we go to a new venue, it's always a little dicey. And we ended up having 25 people in the audience, and only a couple of people had put their names in the hat to begin with. So me and my partner, Sean Mosley, he's our storyteller in residence, we call him. We just start telling stories, and hopefully it warms up the crowd. So sometimes we tell new stories, sometimes we tell tried and true. But the best was when at that show, somebody walked in, they looked at the crowd and they said, "Were more people anticipated?" And I said, "Yes, we usually try to anticipate more people, but we're going to make this work." So at the end of the night, out of that 25 people, 9 people got up and told a story.
Oh, wow.
So people that come in and aren't necessarily ready to tell a story get up and tell a story. One of them was my son, who was home from college and had never gotten up and told a story before, and said, "I'm going to go for it." So, hopefully by me telling a story, Sean telling a story, other people telling stories, people kind of catch the spirit and get up there and tell their story.
We emailed before when we were talking about getting on the show, and you mentioned Black Lodge closing, which I guess it's a little unclear what's going to happen, but it sounds like there'll be some next iteration of Black Lodge with the movies, but not the venue and space and cocktail bar and kind of experience that Black Lodge has been since it moved over to the space near Crosstown.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on that? Why?
Well, I mean, like I said before, if it weren't for venues willing to give Spill It a chance, then Spill It wouldn't be here. I mean, if it wasn't for Crosstown saying you have this space to perform for free, would we have been able to start it? And ever since then, so we moved from Crosstown Arts to America Studios, and because it was Jamie's studio, we had access to that, and that was a great sort of. A lot of people would say that America Studio was the clubhouse for the art scene in Memphis at that time, and just hosted a lot of different kinds of events. And when they closed, we were kind of out in the wilderness a little bit, trying to find. And you were saying, like, you looked at our page and saw that we had been in a lot of different venues.
Right.
And so we're going to be at First Congo on Thursday. In October, we'll be at Novel, and Novel's been a great partner with us. But Black Lodge had really been our home base for a long time, and they were the home of our Grand Slam. So at the end of every event, we have a Slam champion, and then at the end of the year in November, we bring back everybody for a Grand Slam. And that typically, those events are usually about 150 to 200 people. So we can get by with more intimate venues in our regular event, but we need something big for the Grand Slam.
Yeah.
And they were always willing to help us out and really open themselves up. So it wasn't just us, though. If you look at the kind of events that were going on at Black Lodge, a lot of it was showcases for younger artists, new bands, raves, DJs, Comic Cons, and all these different things that really allowed people to give something that they wanted to do a try without having to, like, really invest in a venue that was too expensive to put something on. So I think that when I talk about that we need venues, we need a place where people can try things. And Black Lodge was such a great partner in that.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see what happens next. I mean, and hopeful that it's not. I
mean, I think they're still going with the DVD rental and all of that. But if you look at the places that are around the country, you have like comic book stores that have comedy clubs in the back of them. Like a lot of the places that were like hobbyists, but combined with sort of a culture that's in that area, then that can work. But we have to support venues that want to do that.
Yeah. We were talking about the website is Spill It Memphis, but you try to have events outside Memphis as well. You have one coming up in Mississippi.
We just did. We did
it. Okay.
Did one in August, and that's an interesting one with venues because we work with the Powerhouse down in Oxford, and they could only get us in on the Tuesday because they have so many events that people book them out for fraternities and sororities, weddings. So a lot of the pressure on venues is, do I say no to this wedding that's going to book me out for all night just to give, somebody a chance on a Saturday night? And so, but yeah, we've worked in Oxford. We've done shows in Nashville. I've done some stuff in Chattanooga over the years, and it was under different names. But now that we're trying to expand outside of Spillet, we just do it under the Spillet banner.
Yeah. Powerhouse is Thacker Mountain. Do they do their live shows there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did. I spoke there. That was it was awesome.
And the Arts Council. I can never pronounce. It's the Faulkner County.
Yes. It's that one.
Yes. So I just I cheat and say it's the Art Council of Oxford, Mississippi. But they've been a great support. And again, they've done. I mean, even though they could only get us in on a Tuesday, they helped us. They promoted it. They did all of that stuff. So it was, and that was a fun event. Our Grand Slam champion for 2 years running was Kay Hooker Bryant, which is an 83-year-old woman from Oxford, Mississippi, who has these great stories. And just came up to Memphis and just killed everybody else with her stories.
Yeah,
so.
That's amazing. We're almost out of time here. I always try to ask people before we leave, and this will be interesting with you, the first concert you ever went to?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I think the first concert I ever went to on my own where I bought a ticket was a Reverend Horton Heat concert.
Okay. And where was that?
That was at the Sapphire Supper Club in Orlando, Florida. So I was in.
That's a first.
Yeah.
On a couple levels.
Yeah, I was born in Nashville, but grew up in Florida. So I was in high school in Orlando, and we went to a Reverend Horton Heat show. My parents are both very religious. So if I were being honest, my first concert was probably Amy Grant.
Okay. We've had that. That's not our first. We've had people. Most people, the question is actually real complicated.
Yeah.
And then I went with my parents to something, or Amy Grant there was a thing with my church but I really paid for whatever, you know, Beastie Boys or, just something, So, well, thank you. Again, people can learn more about everything as you're doing at spilletmemphis.org. Josh Campbell, creative director, thanks so much for being here.
And on Instagram and Facebook, you can find us there. That's usually where we do most of our communicating. I'm not quite there on TikTok yet, but we'll get there.
We'll get there. But that is all the time we have this week. A reminder, the Sidebar airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. If you missed any of the show today, you can get the full podcast of the interview on the Daily Memphian site, WYXR, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.